the development of trade and therefore the access to markets is always dynamic. The private sector world is dynamic for various reasons. You know, to illustrate further, the cost of their inputs change, their ability to produce, and the costs therein, as well as the issues pertaining to productivity, innovation, and efficiency, are always on a dynamic trend. And within the context of their markets too, the markets that they would like to equitably access with a certain level playing field in order to promote genuine competition. And these change for various reasons. They change for reasons of policy, they change for reasons of regulation, they change for issues with respect to standards. And indeed, this entire ecosystem is extremely dynamic. And so what we've seen recently by way of the East African community is a healthy sign of engagement. We see that in the context of trade issues, non-tariff barriers, and other kinds of trade issues, there are mechanisms in place which bring consensus, and issues are resolved, and therefore progress continues. And I think that this is extremely important. It's important that as we appreciate and understand and fully recognize that in the path of progress, in the path of greater access to productivity, innovation, and efficiency, and in the path towards greater markets, there will be challenges. And these challenges, provided they are within a framework and a structure by way of an agreement, then there's all possibilities in terms of solutions. Now, for instance, in the case of some of the issues that you brought up between Uganda and Kenya, these have been duly rectified, and it's through the common market principles that partner states and sovereign states adhere to that bring them into further engagement together with the customs union and its protocol and so on. So we have had various instances as a country, as Kenya, and some challenges with respect to some of its products being verified, or alternatively having challenges within the scope of export. But there have been opportune times for both governments to work together to ensure that we're able to resolve the issues and to bring any impasse or misunderstanding to the front. But it's also a mechanism that assists in promoting greater levels of regulation, and therefore it's absolutely critical that we view it from this collective spirit and this collective understanding, and of course the collective leadership of the entire region and structure. And so I believe that we've done fairly well over the last 2 years. In fact, we've reduced the number of NTBs from an EAC perspective tremendously, and now they're very few. But I think that going forward into creating a seamless, transformative ecosystem and to continually promote that necessary progress, then the ability to strengthen East African associations in relevant sectors becomes absolutely critical. Because as much as the public sector and various sovereign states have mechanisms like the technical committee councils, as well as the principal secretary council meetings, etc., and also the ministerial council meetings on a regular basis in all sectors, whether from defense to healthcare to various other key areas, including the markets and so on. It's just as important to find ways in which a strengthened, cohesive private sector in the EAC becomes absolutely critical, so that they're able to engage on a consensus basis, and therefore really support the frameworks and structures that the EAC have developed in order to efficiently address issues. And I think that this is the long-term, strategy, that we need to create an East African Transport Association, we need to create an East African Manufacturers Association, and we need to create various other associations around key sectors that are part of the 6th development strategy of the EAC. And this is the only way then we will be able to ensure that there will be a balance in terms of policy, legislation, regulation, and standards, and indeed the expectation and the incentive for key industries to invest within the region, and also be able to be a value proposition for foreign direct investment.
Yes.
So I think that these are very exciting times, and I think that these dynamics and some of the challenges actually show the real depth of our negotiations, our frameworks in terms of developing protocols, policies, legislations and regulations.
Yeah.
And I think that this must give confidence to the private sector in particular that, that systems exist.
Yes.
Should there be a challenge. We also have an East African Court of Justice, which is now increasingly being developed by way of personnel and capacity to provide justice to issues that are being brought up from an EAC perspective. So indeed, we are beginning to see a favorable ecosystem. One of the broader challenges we have within the EAC is that as much as we have these 16 sectoral councils which cover everything from security to healthcare, as well as the economy, education, and all other social aspects, including the environment and so on. So within the four pillars, the political federation, the customs union, the common market, and the monetary union, and all that takes place by way of building consensus between sovereign states. Various protocols, policies, legislations, and regulations are developed at that apex level and are then ratified within partner states. But what tends to happen, and one of the areas of concern, but at the same time where we need to invest a lot of energy, is how these East African Community protocols, policies, and legislations are then implemented at sovereign state. And there we find a certain challenge because sovereign states have their own entrenched legislations and policies and protocols. And therefore it requires greater consensus as a sovereign state to actually implement some of these overarching policies and protocols which oversee the overall good of the East African community. So I think that indeed we have done fairly well in this area, but of course a lot more needs to be done. For example, we have, in terms of the upper academic levels, engineers, scientists, and doctors and so on, their qualifications are now harmonized throughout the East African community through the Inter-University Council of East Africa. And what we're currently working on so that we achieve one of the core pillars of the EAC is to look into the harmonization of occupational standards for artisans, craftsmen, master craftsmen, technicians, and technologists. And so what we're seeing is essentially a platform where a full connectivity takes place between partner states, and that enables people to actually travel, but also earn a livelihood, which is a return for the energy and competency that they have. And that in time to come, that will be the true equitable judge of a person. So if a welder turns up to a port city in East Africa, for example, Dar es Salaam, he'd be categorized as a level 2 underwater welder, and therefore that distinction in terms of that standard to skill or academic qualification becomes a huge incentive and ability to create that level playing field. Just as we've also created agreements by way of how do we merge the social aspects of countries, like for example healthcare, insurance, and labor laws. And all of this is in process, it's taking place. But as much as we're working on all these frameworks and structures, we need to do a lot more towards seeing to it that we provide a greater value proposition for sovereign states to efficiently implement. We can also appreciate that each country has different levels of implementation capacity. But I think that it is absolutely a critical area, and as much as we have these regular meetings in each sector almost 4 times a year, it's still very important to actually ensure that we keep the emphasis on transformation, because when we're looking at the EAC, we're looking at a collective system. solutions for economic, social, and environment under one roof. And so the value proposition for partner states and sovereign states to expeditiously implement some of these policies and legislations and regulations becomes absolutely critical for their transformative capability. And that's the premise of what the East African community is all about. And the hope that we're able to solve all problems, whether they be social, economic, or environment, under one roof, and thereby leverage in all aspects. And so the transport and logistics sector is a fundamental structure within the context of our progression as the EAC. Nationally and within the sovereign states of EAC, it plays a remarkable enabler for the arteries, which are key transport corridors to attach to the tiniest parts of the country or village, and thereby promote inclusion and an inclusive development with respect to having, for example, a farmer have his produce being sold all the way through the continent. And all of this depends on transport and logistics, and our ability to reduce the time and cost of transport and logistics. As an East African community, it is of great concern, in terms of the costs and time of transport and logistics. And so there's so much to be done in that area with respect to ensuring that we are competitive. Some of it has to do with infrastructure, laying more roads and further kinds of capacity. Some of it has to do with greater coordination, the ability to look at transport and logistics from an end-to-end system. And currently, through COVID, it's been greatly fragmented between the manufacturers, the traders, the logistics providers, and the transporters. And so the thinking then is that if we're able to create the necessary ecosystem, of which we're trying to do by way of harmonizing axle loads, creating one-stop border posts, promoting the necessary policies in order to address the issues of customs union and the transactions therein, then we'll be able to create a seamless transport and logistics system from an end-to-end ecosystem, and thereby promote inclusive development and self-reliance of the entire sector. This would not only mean a substantial impact with respect to, for example, an agriculture producer like a farmer, reducing his cost of transportation, which on average stands at 60%, and therefore makes them highly uncompetitive. But it would also transform manufacturing and various ways in which we're able to provide essential goods for social welfare. And so the key here is, of course, that the transporters, the logistics, the manufacturers, and the traders need to work on a seamless basis. So as much as we're developing all this overarching policy and logistics information, they need to work together to promote a shared opportunity of this potential. The potential of the transport and logistics industry within East Africa is of huge magnitude because it can cover the entire continent, and is a key industry for Kenya, where we're promoting the highest level of innovation, whether it's the ports, the roads, the one-stop border posts, the ability for us to enhance the overall network efficiency and so on is of great importance. But what increasingly needs to happen is that the stakeholders also need to work together, and not in a fragmented way. For the last 3 decades, they've been working at each other with a view of reducing costs amongst each other. But what needs to happen is that they need to share the opportunity and also create that multiplier effect by complementing government systems and so on. One of the most remarkable achievements to date of the East African community in this period of time has been that the very fact that the borders have been open. And this was because sovereign states adhered to the necessary protocol and legislation that was identified within the EAC and collectively agreed to implement it. There were all kinds of challenges with respect to, for example, the credences certificates, and so an application was developed in order to automate that process and to ensure that certificates were not only put online through mobile applications, but certified laboratories were established. This is ongoing work, together with enhancing testing capacities of the disease. Increasingly, what we see now going forward is that whatever we do in the EAC with respect to transport, logistics, trade, commerce, and services has to be anchored to healthcare protocol. And it is something that has dawned onto us and wasn't there prior to COVID, that it has to be a fully integrated feature in all activities. It's in this process that we've had challenges by way of certain sovereign states, imposing a new sovereign issue and policy onto the existing fabric.
Yes.
Now this of course has created disarray, increased the costs, increased the traffic snarl-ups at Malabar and so on. And what we're hoping to do consistently is to see to it that we create a fully integrated system for transport. It's for that reason, now as we're going forward, we're developing the e-health pass, which means that once you're vaccinated, then you would be able to move freely within the East African Community partner states with as little hindrance as possible with respect to healthcare protocol and standards and so on. So these are ongoing, and indeed we have felt the 70 kilometers, 80 kilometers snarl-ups in Malabar and Busia, and indeed it's created great discomfort for the communities, etc. and so on, because of the overwhelming traffic and the stoppage of roads and the blockage of roads and so on. But also the drivers have suffered equally by way of the frustrations of waiting in line and going through traffic at 4 kilometers an hour, which indeed is painful for a machine which is so expensive, so large, and is such an important industrial system. That is the truck, the driver, and it's caused great difficulty by way of supply and demand challenges because of lateness of goods as well as the rising costs of products and so on. So there too, I think that the emphasis has to be continually to promote that progress. But in order for us to truly transform capacities, even as a nation, we're consistently calling for the entire value chain to work together, to collaborate together, and to share the opportunity. And this means that the transporters and logistics providers, the manufacturers, and the traders need to work seamlessly in order to have greater amplification of opportunity. And indeed, the value proposition is there throughout the continent. It's through these times that COMESA and SADC adopted what we were doing within the EAC by way of policies, legislations, and protocols, showing the significance of how we promote the necessary leadership into the continent and allow one of the most important industries in our country and the East African community to flourish with respect to transport and the logistics sector, of which the government has fully committed and gone beyond its commitment at the EAC to create an intermodal transport system that would not only benefit the nation but would benefit the entire East African community and the region. And so the competitiveness is our core focus. You can see this at the ports, where we're about to introduce the integrated computer management system for export and import clearances. And this will be indeed a game changer by way of enhancing the efficiency of transactions and almost doubling the volume of transactions on a yearly basis, thereby creating a full flow of goods, both from an import perspective as well as an export perspective. The challenges we've faced from a global perspective are there, and they'll continuously be a challenge within the region. The East African community is fairly stable. Part of the reason is that there's consistent dialogue and engagement between sovereign states, their defense forces, their police forces, their special forces on terrorism, and so on. And this regularity of dialogue and engagement promotes the necessary activities with respect to enhancing standards and promoting cooperation on issues like, for example, addressing counter-terrorism and the joint activity of intelligence and so on. All of this is ongoing with a view of ensuring that we strengthen the entire region's capacity to deal with insecurity. And it's this proactive capability which promotes that necessary harmonization, but then deters any kind of terrorist attack or security issue. And in the long run, it's that ability for all partner states to leverage on each other and work together, not only in terms of community intelligence and border posts and various other institutions, but also the fact that armed forces and the defense forces and security forces and the police and the various other dedicated counter agencies are building capacity together and sharing information and being able to set the standards with respect to policies, legislations, and regulations. So there's a huge coordination effect that's going on and promoting greater levels of innovation, as well as ways in which we can build content and capacity within the entire fabric of mitigation of security challenges. This is indeed the most remarkable development and extraordinary from all its perspectives, because it creates for the first time the real value proposition for what the EAC espouses, market-driven, people-centered, and the ability for our region to solve issues of social, economic, and environmental concerns. And within the context of the historical development of the EAC, which is now, well over 100 years, but really took off within the context of its four pillars of the East African Political Confederation, as well as the East African Monetary Union and the Customs Union and the Common Market, only some 20 years ago. We've seen some tremendous strides and gains already from this regional activity. Even if we look at Kenya's context today, our exports over the last year have increased by 12%, to 157 billion shillings. And the total intra-trade within the EAC is 15%. But what's really significant is it now creates a real value proposition of transformation. And this is because the existing 6 member states, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, South Sudan, and Burundi, consist of approximately 175 million, is a fairly large region. But with Congo, you have another 100 million people joining us, which will be 275 million people, and that's a sizable, huge opportunity. It becomes one of the 7th most populous region in the world, the 10th largest country by size. Congo adds 2.5 million square kilometers, and the entire context with respect to our existing growth rate, which pre-COVID was around 5%, and with respect to GDP and a 7% growth rate, now creates a greater value proposition for more dynamic growth and development. So this has an bearing on all our efforts from a customs union perspective, the ability for Congo, DRC Congo, to use our ports more efficiently, for us to be able to have a link between the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean, and thereby create trade routes throughout the African continent to various locations, but also for our ability to enhance overall sectors. For example, the tourism sector could benefit through the existing ongoing work with respect to a one tourist visa, and create the most epic journey of a traveller to Africa by coming into the East African Community Tourism Circuit, which stretches from the coasts to the wildlife and all the way to the great and magnificent forests of Congo. And this would become, a game changer in tourism. But equally important is the rich mineral resource that Congo has, and the powerful manufacturing capacity that Kenya has, and that ability to promote value addition from all these natural resources, all the divergence of people, the great diversity within this region, together with the Congolese, thereby creating great diversity in terms of innovation, creativity, resourcefulness, from a social, economic, environmental perspectives, or that ability to create high standard gains by way of protecting and conserving our environment. So it has a multitude of opportunity, and creates, a value proposition, because trade, industry and services depend hugely on markets that are large enough for forward investment and amplification possibilities. And this provides that not only for local investors but also for foreign direct investors. The ability for us to set standards between countries and in countries on various matters of immigration control, the ability for us to address firearms issues and so on, this enhances the overall security of the entire region. And what we see as urgent, of course, within the context of the East African community, is to, at any cost, come to achieve prosperity and conservation of the environment, of our environment, of climate. And this requires us to really push ahead so that we're able to be a source of hope for all those that are agitating and are challenged. So it is prosperity at all costs, but of course in balance with the environment and social development. It is about inclusion. And we think that within this context, the prosperity would then yield. We also see that further into the African Union, there are other various supporting features. And I think that we're beginning to see a multitude of supporting structures, not only at the neighbour within the country, but also at a continental level. And there too, within the context of the EAC, one of the other important achievements to date is our inclusion into the African Free Trade Area. 2 weeks ago, we came to an agreement of 1,500 tariff lines, which are part of the rules of origin of goods within the African Free Trade Area. This means that we're at 77%. Sorry, we're at 87%, and the threshold is 90%, and we hope to complete this by the 15th of February, and that would then enable the entire region to fulfill the obligations of rules of origin, and therein all the tariff lines that then create the platform for a nurturing ability to nurture the regional industrial service and trade might. When we look at the history of cooperation, this cooperation within the three partner states, the initial partner states of Uganda, Tanzania and Kenya, started off almost 100 years ago by way of the railways, and then went on to the East African Commission and subsequently a trading bloc. And it was only at the beginning of the century that they, as political leaders, decide to find ways in which we're able to create a far more extraordinary system, which is beyond a trade bloc. It covers all facets of life. And equally important, because even if we look at the economy, it can't run simply on tariff lines and taxes, etc. and so on. It requires the social aspects, it requires environmental aspects, it requires an entire system to work in order for businesses to flourish and to expand, to innovate, to work efficiently and so on, to be productive and so on. So the history has been exceptional, but in the last 20 years, what started out as a political federation is definitely going to be the game changer, and we're beginning to see signs. For instance, the agreement that we take, the first step being the political confederation. This means that this year, partner states will be building consensus at grassroots level of their respective sovereign states towards the development of a common constitution. And this would then imply that, indeed, while this will take an innovative shape, we're looking at one region. We're looking at the 10th largest region geographically, the 7th most populous region, and that ability to ensure that we gain as much as possible by way of the inclusion of diversity, and that ability to work together to address issues of prosperity and social and economic development. So I'd say that the progress is being made, and And on the other hand, the idea is relevant today by way of ensuring that we create borderless systems, we create systems of high dimension for individuals within the region. But most importantly, it's being supported by the work we're doing in the customs union, the common market, the economic fronts, by way of creating value chains of interdependent industries. For example, the tea that we consume in Kenya and the world consumes come from many parts of the East African community. And so does the coffee, and the tourism sector also benefits. So we see this necessity to promote interdependent value chains, interdependent work on social aspects, and the joint forces towards some of the threats, even if it's the locust invasion, that ability to work together to ensure that we protect the plight of the farmer, or to enhance the overall gains, and most importantly to be able to ensure that even while most East African partner states are growing, that the trickle-down effect, the effect of being inclusive and promoting inclusive development, rests on that ability to look at a much larger market state. And so I think that the progress therein is tremendous. We are seeing it on a parallel basis, on the economic side, on the social side. We're standardizing hospitals and hospital curriculum, as well as creating centers of excellence for special ailments, like the Kidney Institute is in Kenya, and then we have other kinds of institutes all around East Africa. All of this showing that in nature we're actually working towards this, physically, by building common infrastructure and shared infrastructure, bringing the consensus of the people into a constitution, and doing very well in terms of trying to see how we project within the community and on a global basis. And I think that it's only a matter of time, but the journey to the end is profound, and even in the journey itself, whether it'll come in 10 years or 20 years, is significant by way of the returns of aspirations towards promoting that inclusive development, self-reliance and resilience. The overarching aim now in the short term is to build the necessary institutions like the East African Monetary Institute, the East African Central Bank, the East African Surveillance System for finances, as well as the research facility. And at this particular moment, we're going through a review system. Normally, countries propose their involvement in creating the institution, and thereafter, the entire East African community and its leadership, together with the Council of Ministers and so on, agree, having met certain conditions. And so this is well in process, and one of the first steps is indeed the East African Monetary Institute, followed by this East African Central Bank, and thereafter, it'll take the capacity and framework with respect to a common financial currency. What we are seeing is that the emergence or the re-emergence of tensions over certain sectoral capacities. But broadly speaking, at the EAC level, we have managed to harmonize many NTBs. In fact, we have only a handful of NTBs now to address. Our institutions are fully functional, and there's an overarching capacity for bringing consensus and progress towards issue, as well as complementary balance. These issues with respect to trade issues are there. They keep cropping up. In the case of Kenya, for example, it was the milk, sugar, then recently the fish. Prior to that was the salt. But in all instances, the important issue here is that the private sector has recourse to action. And what we need to consistently do is to ensure that we're able to mitigate these challenges by having a closer cooperation between the private sectors of the East African community. at sector level. So if it's the salt sector, the salt value chain, the entire industry of the East African community working closely together to ensure that they have a balanced, harmonized position. So that doesn't individually or within individual self-interests of private sector subject a sovereign state to take an action that now is detrimental to the much larger picture of the East African community. And so consistently we are appealing to the private sector to engage in a structured way, in a systematic way, on a sector-by-sector, value chain by value chain basis, and have a true EAC map of a level playing field. And that in turn would have a major impact in terms of some of the progressive legislations, policies, protocols that can appear within the EAC, which would be for the common good of all stakeholders. And indeed, the provision of competitiveness of each country can also be included within the context of these negotiations. So the fear that we're undoing our industry is unfounded, because the market is much larger. Without the market, it would create a lesser of an opportunity. And equally important is the fact that while the market is extremely important, the collaborative features of the EAC becomes absolutely critical. For example, Kenya imports a lot of its produce from East Africa, but has a milling and industrial capacity to not only process the cereals, but to turn them into biscuits and other value addition products and so on. So the thinking really has to be that what is the value addition at each stage? And consistently, as a public sector, as the government, we want to ensure that we keep nurturing the industrial capacity, because therein lies the value. If you take a produce, then every time you process it, it's 5 times the value of the original produce. And this is the case with pyrethrum and various other things. And when we add science and technology, it increases by 25 times for export purposes and so on. So that really is the end game. The end game is that progression towards the ability to have much larger markets. And indeed, this means that there has to be a lot more cooperation, collaboration, and commitment towards creating those highly advanced frameworks and structures consisting of policies, legislations, regulations, and standards for each of those value chains. So we see that the process and structure and the frameworks that exist will aid. They'll definitely aid this capacity, and it requires stakeholders to use these systems and to use the structures. Kenya has done remarkably well with respect to its bilateral arrangements between countries. We've had huge success with respect to enhancing our relationship with the United Republic of Tanzania and also with Uganda. And this has also assisted us greatly, not only at a bilateral level, but also informed the regional capacities too. And so I think that we've had a very healthy trend, and we have all the hope that we should not be concerned or too much deterred by any issue, because we have the national systems, the regional systems to come into action, as we've done in the case of fish, in the case of salt, in the case of cereals and so on. With all our effort, with all our might as the East African community, we need to find ways in which we really promote the prosperity and the transformation of the EAC on all fronts and on a balanced basis, on social issues with respect to enhancing health and health systems and the coverage of universal health care, as well as the provision of support for special considerations of illnesses, but also our ability to find ways in which we harmonize the entire qualifications frameworks between the East African community, thereby creating different avenues for young people to seek their livelihood in different parts of the EAC. The ability for us to find ways in which we build the economic capacity around interdependent value chains is absolutely critical. this is critical because we want to promote a people-centered region, which means that we would like to ensure that prosperity and the opportunity of prosperity is reached to all within the region. And this requires, therefore, a high concentration with respect to identified value chains like textile, automotive, the ability for us to work on agriculture as well as food resilience and security, and find ways in which we're able to build other unique capacities like the ICT industry, transport and logistics and so on. So a huge emphasis with respect to work on value chains, the much bigger picture that we need to draw from investors and industrialists and traders and service providers of going beyond Kenya and into East African community and building markets and building structures based on government's support and commitment. But it's also the very important role of very special groups like women. If I take you to Busia, Malabar, Namanga, you name the border, you have almost 2 million women on a daily basis with tremendous business acumen and also the ability to create relations and take risk, promoting trade across borders. Now this is absolutely astonishing and a real value to the entire value addition process. And this needs to be greatly uplifted by way of its extraordinary strengths and capacities, and a policy environment that will be truly dedicated to amplification of trade. And I think that these are the ways, strategic ways, where we can actually make a profound impact to be inclusive to SME and micro-enterprise development, to create that ecosystem and build that capacity. So I would say that we focus on transport and logistics and trade. We focus on the trade and the transport and logistics platform, and we invest fully and exceptionally to create a low-cost, high-efficiency transport system. But at the same time, see to it that we are able to be inclusive to the SME sector and create a very strong value proposition for value chains and interdependent value chains within the East African community. That would see us through, because the potential is so great, and now it's how to reach that potential in order to transform. We're already seeing this, and we're seeing statistics of 15% intra-trade, but we need to promote almost 60% intra-trade to really feel the full impact of this work. And the export possibilities into the East African community and beyond are exceptional. We've seen in the case of Congo, Congo imports 44% of its produce from the Far East, products and so on. And the combined EAC only exports 13% to Congo, showing great disparity in terms of a neighbor and its requirements and where we are. And so that courage and that inspiration to actually get on with it and start implementing and taking full engagement is a priority issue now, even from a government's perspective, who have laid down this framework and fabric. And so we're calling upon Kenyan industries to engage into the East African community and build markets that are beyond Kenya. We're encouraging service providers to engage their professional capacities, whether it's in finance, tourism, etc., into the EAC. And we're also seeking the support of traders, that they engage too and amplify the trade ecosystems and work closely with existing frameworks to inform an ecosystem that truly would be beneficial for them. So on one hand, it's their ability for the private sector and the social sectors to engage, but on the other, it's to also formulate and assist government formulate the right kind of policies, legislations that promote greater levels of productivity and innovation and efficiency. And so we count on everyone. We count on all to make the profound impact that we require.